The day my brother-in-law called me a fraud in front of a room full of people, I was wearing the same gray cardigan I'd had for 11 years. I remember that detail because afterward, when I got home and sat on the bathroom floor, I kept staring at the loose thread on the left cuff, pulling at it, thinking about how one small thing, if you pull long enough, can unravel everything. His name is Victor, my husband's older brother. And for 6 years I had tried, genuinely tried, to make him like me. I should back up. My name is Christine and I'm 51 years old. I've spent most of my adult life working as a registered nurse, first in a busy Philadelphia ER, then later in home hospice care after my knees started giving me trouble. I met my husband, Raymond, at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue in the summer of 2015. He was quiet in the way that feels rare at parties. He sat near the edge of the yard with a paper plate of potato salad, watching everyone else like he was trying to figure out the rules of a game no one had explained to him. I thought that was charming. I still think it's charming, honestly. I just didn't understand yet what it meant when someone that quiet had a very loud older brother. Raymond and I got married in 2017. Small ceremony, his parents' backyard in Allentown. The kind of wedding where someone's uncle gets too warm and falls asleep in a lawn chair before the cake is cut. Victor gave a toast. He talked about Raymond for 4 minutes and looked at me exactly once. I told myself it would get better. We had 6 years to find out it wouldn't. Victor had always fancied himself the family's financial authority. He was a commercial real estate broker, which meant he had opinions about everything involving money, property, other people's decisions, and the general direction of the universe. When Raymond and I bought our house in 2019, Victor showed up uninvited to the walkthrough and spent 40 minutes telling us why we were overpaying. When I suggested we refinance in 2021, Victor called Raymond privately to talk him out of it. When I took on extra hospice shifts to build up our savings, Victor made a comment at Thanksgiving about how nurses were glorified babysitters for people who had already given up. I smiled. I passed the roles. I went home and cried in the car before I even had my seatbelt on. The thing you need to understand about Raymond is that he loves his brother in the specific helpless way that some people love the people who hurt them most. Victor was 8 years older. Victor had helped their mother when their father left. Victor had co-signed Raymond's first car loan. In Raymond's mind, Victor was practically a saint, and any friction between Victor and me was something I was manufacturing through oversensitivity. He doesn't mean anything by it, Raymond would say. He called my entire career a dead-end babysitting job. He was stressed. His biggest listing fell through that week. I learned to stop bringing it up. Now, Raymond's mother, her name is Phyllis, and she is a small, sharp-eyed woman from Scranton who can make you feel inadequate without technically saying anything unkind, had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's in 2020. Raymond and I had talked extensively, meaning I talked and Raymond nodded, about what this would mean going forward. We agreed we would help wherever we could. We agreed we wanted her to stay comfortable and close to family. What I didn't fully anticipate was that Victor would use his mother's illness as a reason to insert himself into every financial decision our household made, on the grounds that the family had to be on the same page. The family. As though I wasn't part of it. Phyllis had created her estate plan years before the diagnosis. She had a will, a trust, a designated power of attorney. Everything organized, the way practical people organize things before they have to. The trust divided her estate between Victor and Raymond equally. There was also a small separate bequest, a sum she'd set aside specifically, and in writing for Raymond's spouse, for household support, because Phyllis in her clearer moments had told Raymond she wanted to make sure I was taken care of. She'd told me this herself, sitting at her kitchen table in 2022, with a cup of tea going cold beside her because she kept forgetting it was there. "You've been good to my boy," she said. "Better than he sometimes deserves." I had never told Victor about that conversation. He found out about the bequest a different way. In the fall of 2023, Phyllis had a significant decline. She moved into memory care in October, and by December, it became clear she would need full-time skilled nursing support that exceeded what her Medicare coverage and existing savings could comfortably sustain. Victor called a family meeting. I use that phrase loosely because what it actually was Victor sitting at our kitchen table. Our kitchen, he'd let himself in with the spare key Raymond had given him years ago, with a yellow legal pad and a very particular expression on his face. "We need to talk about restructuring how Phyllis's assets are managed," he said. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at his legal pad. There are some allocations in the trust that, given the current situation, don't make practical sense. I said, "Which allocations are you referring to?" He looked up then. "The personal bequest to you." Raymond shifted in his chair. I kept my voice even. I'd spent 20 years talking to people in crisis situations. I knew how to keep my voice even. That bequest is documented in the trust. It reflects your mother's wishes when she was fully competent. Her wishes from 3 years ago, Victor said, before we knew how significant her care costs were going to be. The trust has provisions for care costs, I said. The attorney built those in. That bequest doesn't affect what's available for her care. Victor set down his pen. Christine, I'm going to be direct with you. I think you've been managing my brother's understanding of this situation in a way that benefits you financially, and I don't think that's appropriate. The room went very quiet. I looked at Raymond. Raymond was looking at the table. Are you accusing me of something? I asked. I'm raising a concern, Victor said, about your influence over decisions that affect this family. I stood up very calmly and asked Victor to leave my home. He did. Raymond followed him to the door, and I heard them talking in low voices in the front hallway for several minutes before the door closed. Raymond came back into the kitchen and said, "He's worried about Mom. He doesn't handle stress well." I thought about the gray cardigan, about loose threads, about how long I had been pulling at myself trying to keep the peace. "I'm not forfeiting the bequest," I said. "Nobody's asking you to forfeit anything. Your brother just has implied that I manipulated your mother for financial gain. I'm telling you now, clearly, so it's been said. I won't be pressured out of what she intended for me to have." Raymond looked at the wall behind me for a long moment. "Let's just get through the holidays," he said. The holidays were fine the way a bruise is fine after it stops hurting. Everything looked normal on the surface and ached when you pressed on it. In January, I received a letter from a family attorney. Not our estate attorney, a different one Victor had hired, informing me that he was initiating a formal challenge to the trust's personal bequest. The letter stated, and I want to be precise here because the language matters, that there was evidence suggesting the bequest had been the result of undue influence and potentially fraudulent misrepresentation on my part during a period when Phyllis's cognitive capacity was already compromised. I sat with that letter at my kitchen table for a very long time. Fraudulent misrepresentation. That was what 11 years of nursing, of sitting with dying people and holding their hands and going home to cry and going back the next day anyway. That was what it had been reduced to. I called my sister Donna. Donna is 55, a retired paralegal who now does consulting work, and she has approximately 0 patience for what she calls men in ill-fitting suits who mistake volume for authority. I read her the letter. She was quiet for 3 seconds and then said, "Okay, we're doing this right. Who's your estate attorney?" Her name was Patricia, Pat, and she'd done our estate planning in 2020. I called her that afternoon. She pulled up Phyllis's original trust documents, reviewed the challenge letter, and then said something that I've thought about many times since. "Christine, the way this trust was written and the documentation of Phyllis's state of mind at the time the bequest was established is going to be very hard for Victor to overcome, but I want you prepared for this to be unpleasant before it's resolved." I told her I had been preparing for unpleasant for about 6 years. She said, "Good." The formal hearing was set for March. Not a full trial, a trust dispute mediation with a judge appointed neutral and an opportunity for both sides to present. Victor's attorney filed a package of what he called supporting documentation. Emails he claimed showed me steering Phyllis's financial conversations, a statement from a neighbor suggesting Phyllis had seemed confused during a conversation about her estate, and a medical record. A single page from a general practitioner's visit that he argued demonstrated Phyllis had been cognitively impaired at the time the bequest was formalized. I read that documentation over a weekend and barely slept. Because the thing is, Victor wasn't entirely wrong that Phyllis's cognition was declining during that period. That was true. What he was wrong about was what that meant for her legal capacity. Cognitive decline is not a light switch. A person can have early-stage Alzheimer's and still be entirely capable of executing legal documents. I knew this. I'd sat with dozens of patients navigating exactly that line. But explaining the clinical reality of capacity assessment to someone who had already decided the story wasn't something I was going to be able to do alone. I called Donna again. She said, "Do you know any geriatric specialists? Anyone who actually assessed Phyllis around that time. I thought about it for a moment. And then I thought about Dr. Anita Osi. Anita and I had worked together for 4 years in the hospice program. She was a geriatric physician and palliative care specialist, one of the most precise and careful clinicians I had ever seen work. She had left our organization in 2022 to take a position at a major academic medical center. And I had lost touch with her in the way you lose touch with people who are genuinely exceptional. You just assume they're somewhere being exceptional and don't need you bothering them. But Anita had conducted a formal cognitive assessment of Phyllis in early 2022 at the request of the estate attorney, specifically to establish baseline capacity before the trust revisions were finalized. That assessment existed, it was documented. And it directly addressed Phyllis's legal capacity at exactly the moment Victor was arguing she was incapable. I found Anita's contact through the Academic Medical Center's directory. I emailed her on a Tuesday evening, explained the situation as briefly and clearly as I could, and apologized for the presumption of reaching out after so long. She replied Wednesday morning, "I remember Phyllis. I remember the assessment. Send me the challenge documentation and I'll tell you what I think." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 3 months. The hearing was on a Thursday in March, 9 in the morning, in a room that was aggressively beige. Victor arrived with his attorney and a leather portfolio. Raymond sat beside me and did not reach for my hand. Donna sat directly behind me, and before the hearing began she leaned forward and said quietly, "Chin up. We've got what we need." Pat had prepared me thoroughly. She'd walked me through every document, every likely argument, every moment where Victor's attorney might try to redirect or reframe. I knew what was coming. I still felt my hands shaking under the table when Victor's attorney began. He laid out the argument methodically. Undue influence. Emotional dependency. The idea that Phyllis had become emotionally reliant on me during her early decline in a way that compromised her independent judgment. The emails, the neighbor's statement, the single page of medical records. He spoke for 22 minutes and he was very good at his job. By the time he sat down, I could feel the weight of it pressing against the room. Then the neutral asked Victor directly whether he had specific examples of Christine making financial suggestions to Phyllis. Victor leaned forward. "Multiple times," he said. "My mother told me herself that Christine was always asking about the estate planning, about what was going to happen with the house, about." "That's not accurate," I said. I hadn't planned to say it. It came out flat and clear and I didn't take it back. Victor looked at me. "Excuse me, your mother never said that to you because it didn't happen. I discussed her care needs with her because I'm a nurse and that was a practical conversation. I did not discuss her estate with her, not once. What she offered about the bequest, she offered without any prompting. You're calling me a liar," Victor said. "I'm telling you what happened." Pat touched my arm lightly. I settled back. Victor's attorney requested the medical record be entered into evidence. The neutral reviewed it. He asked about the date, a general practitioner visit from October 2021. He asked whether there had been any formal cognitive assessment conducted during that period. Pat said, "Yes, we'd like to submit that now." She introduced Anita's assessment. 14 pages, dated February 2022, conducted 6 weeks before the trust revisions were finalized. It documented Phyllis's cognitive status across 7 domains. It included a specific section on legal and financial decision-making capacity. And it concluded, in clinical language that left no room for interpretation, that Phyllis retained full capacity to execute legal documents at the time of the assessment and for the foreseeable short-term period. Victor's attorney asked to review it. He was quiet for a long time. Then Pat said, "We'd also like to note that Dr. Anita Osi, the geriatric specialist who conducted that assessment, is available to speak to its findings." Anita was not in the room. She was on a video call that the hearing coordinator patched in, sitting at a desk with a white coat, and the particular calm of someone who has testified in legal proceedings before and finds them considerably less frightening than a patient coding at 2 in the morning. She explained the assessment. She explained the distinction between general cognitive decline and legal capacity. She explained that the GP record Victor's attorney had documented a conversation about Phyllis's blood pressure medication, not her cognitive status, and that using it as evidence of compromised capacity was not clinically supportable. She said this without drama, without raising her voice, without looking at Victor once. The neutral asked 2 clarifying questions. Anita answered both, And then the room was very quiet. Victor was looking at his portfolio. Not at his attorney, not at the neutral, not at me. Just at the leather cover of his portfolio, like he was reading something only he could see. His attorney asked for a brief recess. The neutral granted 10 minutes. During those 10 minutes, Donna leaned forward again and said softly, "He didn't know about the assessment." "No," I said. "He didn't. He thought he had all the documents. He thought Raymond would have told him everything," I said. "Raymond didn't know about it either, actually. Pat requested it. I just answered the questions." Donna sat back. I heard her exhale slowly. When the hearing resumed, Victor's attorney made a brief statement indicating that in light of the submitted documentation, his client was withdrawing the challenge to the bequest. Victor did not look at me. Raymond, sitting beside me, reached over and put his hand on mine. I let him. I didn't squeeze back, but I let him. We drove home mostly in silence. At a red light on Broad Street, Raymond said, "I didn't know Pat had ordered that assessment." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about how to answer that. "Because every time I've tried to tell you things about your brother, you've found a way to explain them away. I needed this to speak for itself." He didn't say anything for the rest of the drive. That evening, Donna came over and we sat on the back porch with decaf and the kind of silence that's actually peaceful rather than the kind that's just waiting to become an argument. She said, "What happens now?" "The bequest stands," I said. "It goes back into the normal trust process. I mean with Raymond." I looked out at the yard. Our neighbor's dog was barking at something in the bushes, that persistent, uncertain bark of an animal that suspects there's a threat but hasn't confirmed it yet. "I don't know," I said, and that was honest. What I did know was this. I had spent 6 years managing my own reactions so that Raymond would be comfortable. 6 years softening what I said about Victor so that the peace could be kept. 6 years making myself smaller in my own marriage because the alternative felt like too much to ask him to hold. And the only thing that had finally made any difference was the thing I hadn't done for him at all. I had called a colleague. I had told the truth. I had sat in a beige room and not backed down when someone looked at me and said the thing I'd feared hearing for years, that I was a manipulator, a fraud, that my care was calculation. The truth didn't need me to defend it very loudly, it just needed to be in the room. Raymond and I started couples counseling in April. He is trying, in the slow, effortful way of someone who has never been asked to see clearly before. Some sessions are hard, some are harder, but he shows up, and I think showing up is where everything either starts or doesn't. Victor has not contacted me since March. Raymond speaks to him occasionally briefly, about Phyllis's care. He no longer gives him information about our household finances. That boundary was Raymond's idea, which I think matters more than the boundary itself. Phyllis is comfortable. She is in good hands. She doesn't always remember my name when I visit, but sometimes she reaches for my hand when I sit beside her, the way people do when the name doesn't come, but something else does. Something older and quieter and harder to take away. I still have that gray cardigan. I sewed the loose thread back in last fall. Some things, if you care for them right, hold together longer than you expected.